Okay? Around here, if you've got children who've experienced failure and rejection, when they become independent, where they would become independent, often they become very either dependent or isolated. I see both of these things happening with children who have gone through these two things. Sometimes children are very whiny and say they can't do it themselves, and they kind of cling to the teachers or find a friend who does things for them. I knew a child who was always with another child, and I couldn't figure out, he was quite an older high school student. Turned out he couldn't read a clock. And he relied on that other student to tell him what time it was in terms of when classes changed and where he had to go. Very dependent on other people for just basic needs. Other students will become very isolated at this point. And I always use the example of a 4th grade student. There's always one in every class who sits down in the back of the classroom with either a hood or a hat over their head, and you may not see that child's face for the entire year. This is a child who has experienced failure and rejection, has decided to isolate himself or herself to the point where they are not going to risk being rejected again. And a lot of times what happens with children like this is that people just leave them alone, and they just sit right in that isolation for quite a long time without being helped. Instead of generosity then, for a child who has experienced rejection, failure, and isolation from their peers, what happens is that instead of pro-social generosity, we see antisocial behavior. And so what often happens is that we see only this behavior. We meet up with a child on the street. He throws garbage at our feet and refuses to pick it up, or in the cafeteria or someplace like that, antisocial behavior. Spit, sneer us on the sidewalk, antisocial behavior. Snarl, sneers, yeah, Bill's making some antisocial gestures back there. Yep, we see a lot of it, and it is designed to keep from being rejected again. And if you can understand that this antisocial behavior just again brings us back to more rejection, it's another perfect circle to keep these kids on the flip side of the circle of courage. And the only way to get them to go back over to the other side is to just work on helping them feel like they belong, and nurture and nurture and nurture. I have many suggestions about that. I'm not sure how much time we have left. Okay. One of the things there, Richard Kerwin put out a model of, I think that was called the 5-minute intervention. And with children, especially surly teenagers, I always call this the 5-second intervention. When you're walking by a student who's got that surly look and the head down, what I often say is, "Hi, I like the color of your shirt." And I'm gone before they can say, to me. And I continue to try and kind of woo them and let them in over time to the point where they can't ignore me anymore, or just a hand on the shoulder or something that will get their attention and let them know that I'm here and that they're okay. And if I am allowed a conversation and get in a little bit more involved with that student, I let them know how much they're liked and we're glad that they're here. Welcoming a child on any given day. Here's an example of a student who faces rejection at school. And I don't think that the staff member understands it as rejection, but this is how it's taken by the student. I've had a lot of students who come into crisis and they're throwing chairs and tables and they end up being restrained on the floor, a terrible ordeal. And when I finally get them calmed down and we're in a room sitting together and I say, "What went wrong today?" I can remember a couple of students being very clear about the fact that they had been out of school for a couple of days, something had happened at home, they were sick, or some family member had had a crisis. They came back into school already feeling bad, and the teacher said, nice to see you, where were you? Instead of, "I'm happy to see you, I'm so glad you're here, are you okay?" Very, very different effect that you have with students. So, this is called the circle of fear. It is just in response to my use of the Circle of Courage from Reclaiming Youth Network. I hope you find it helpful. There's a lot more we could say about this, but it's a nice framework for thinking about children, especially teenagers who are struggling in school. Thanks.
Nancy, what I love about your presentations is it gives us so much to think about and to discuss. And I think all of us can imagine examples for every instance on the circle that you described. And what you emphasized is that it can happen unwittingly, where we're participants without realizing it. Well, once again, Nancy Dickerson, I want to thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill.